In the mountains of Afghanistan, where silence can mean survival and one wrong move spells death, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos learned that sometimes losing your weapon doesn't make you defenseless, it makes you dangerous. When 5 armed insurgents cornered her in a rocky canyon, thinking an unarmed female soldier would be easy prey, they had no idea they were about to face someone who had trained her entire life for this exact moment. What happened in those 83 seconds would rewrite military training manuals and prove that true warriors don't need weapons to be lethal. They need only courage, intelligence, and the will to survive. This is the story of how one woman turned her greatest disadvantage into her deadliest strength, and why 5 men who thought they held all the power discovered too late that they had gravely underestimated their target. Maria Santos never planned to become a soldier. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she was the daughter of a mechanic and a nurse, expected to follow a traditional path. But Maria was different from the start. While other girls played with dolls, she was outside climbing trees, building forts, and learning to fight from her 3 older brothers who treated her like one of the boys. Her childhood was marked by challenges that would shape her into the warrior she would become. When Maria was 8 years old, her father suffered a serious injury at work that left him partially disabled. The family struggled financially, and Maria watched her mother work double shifts while her father battled depression and chronic pain. It was during this difficult time that Maria learned her first crucial lesson about survival. When life knocks you down, you get back up stronger. The Santos family lived on the rough side of town, where gang activity was common and walking alone after dark was dangerous. Maria's mother worried constantly about her only daughter, but Maria refused to live in fear. Instead of avoiding the dangerous areas, she learned to navigate them. She studied people's movements, learned to read situations before they became threatening, and developed an uncanny ability to sense danger before it arrived. In high school, Maria excelled in athletics, particularly in track and field. Her coaches noticed something special about her, not just her physical abilities, but her mental toughness. While other athletes would crumble under pressure, Maria seemed to thrive in high-stress situations. She had a way of staying calm when everything around her was chaos, a trait that would prove invaluable years later in the mountains of Afghanistan. Maria's interest in the military began during her junior year when a Marine recruiter visited her school. Unlike many of her classmates who saw military service as a last resort, Maria was immediately drawn to the discipline, the challenge, and the opportunity to serve something greater than herself. She spent months researching different branches and career paths, ultimately deciding on the Army where she could pursue her interest in military intelligence. Her family was divided about her decision. Her mother feared for her safety, especially knowing that Maria would likely see combat. Her father, despite his own struggles, was proud of her choice but worried she didn't fully understand what she was signing up for. Her brothers were supportive but protective, knowing their sister well enough to understand that once Maria set her mind to something, nothing would stop her. The day Maria left for basic training was emotional for the entire family. As she hugged her mother goodbye at the bus station, her mother whispered words that would stay with her throughout her military career. Remember, Mija, your strength doesn't come from your weapons or your training. It comes from your heart and your mind. Never forget that. Basic training at Fort Benning was everything Maria expected and more. The physical demands were intense, but Maria had prepared well and found herself among the top performers in her unit. What surprised her instructors was not her physical capabilities. Many recruits were strong and fast, but her tactical thinking and problem-solving abilities under pressure. During one training exercise, Maria's unit was ambushed during a night patrol simulation. While other recruits panicked or followed standard procedures, Maria quickly assessed the situation and identified an unconventional escape route that allowed her team to outmaneuver their instructors. The drill sergeant later pulled her aside and told her he had been training soldiers for 15 years and had rarely seen such instinctive tactical awareness from a recruit. Maria's performance in basic training earned her the opportunity to pursue advanced infantry training, unusual for someone planning to work in intelligence. She jumped at the chance, understanding that the more skills she possessed, the more valuable she would be as a soldier. The advanced training pushed her to her limits and beyond, teaching her not just how to fight, but how to think like a warrior. During weapons training, Maria discovered she had a natural aptitude for marksmanship. Her instructors were amazed by her accuracy and her ability to remain calm under simulated combat conditions. She could hit targets that other soldiers missed, and she could do it while under stress that would cause others to shake. But, more importantly, she learned that being a good soldier was about much more than being able to shoot accurately. The most valuable lesson Maria learned during her training was about adaptability. Military situations rarely go according to plan, and the soldiers who survive are those who can think quickly and adjust to changing circumstances. Maria excelled in these scenarios, often finding creative solutions to problems that stumped her fellow soldiers. One particular training exercise would prove prophetic. During a simulated hostage rescue, Maria's weapon malfunctioned at a critical moment. Instead of panicking or calling for backup, she quickly assessed her options and used the environment to her advantage, employing hand-to-hand combat techniques and improvised weapons to complete the mission successfully. Her instructor noted in her file that Maria had demonstrated exceptional ability to remain effective even when deprived of standard equipment. After completing her advanced training, Maria was assigned to military intelligence as planned, but her exceptional performance had caught the attention of special operations recruiters. She was invited to try out for specialized units that required both intelligence-gathering skills and advanced combat capabilities. Maria knew this was an opportunity that could define her entire military career. The selection process for special operations was brutal. Of the 30 soldiers who began the program, only 8 would complete it. Maria was the only woman in the group, and she faced skepticism from some of her male counterparts who questioned whether she belonged there. Rather than being discouraged, Maria used their doubt as motivation to push herself even harder. The training covered everything from advanced combat techniques to survival skills, from intelligence gathering to psychological warfare. Maria absorbed it all, demonstrating time and again that she possessed not just the physical skills required, but the mental toughness that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. She learned to fight with various weapons, but, more importantly, she learned to fight without them. One of the most challenging aspects of the training was the psychological component. Soldiers were subjected to stress positions, sleep deprivation, and intense interrogation techniques designed to break them down mentally. Many strong soldiers failed this phase, unable to maintain their composure under extreme psychological pressure. Maria not only survived this training, but excelled at it, demonstrating an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize stress and maintain clear thinking even under the most difficult circumstances. Her instructors began to take special notice of Maria's unique combination of skills. She was physically capable, mentally tough, tactically brilliant, and possessed an intuition for dangerous situations that couldn't be taught. More importantly, she had demonstrated repeatedly that she could perform under pressure when everything was going wrong. By the time Maria completed her specialized training, she had earned the respect of her instructors and fellow soldiers. She was assigned to a special operations unit that combined intelligence gathering with direct action missions, exactly the type of challenging and important work she had hoped for when she first enlisted. Maria's first deployment was to Iraq, where she served with distinction for 12 months. She participated in numerous operations, gathering crucial intelligence and proving herself in combat situations. Her commanders consistently rated her performance as exceptional, noting particularly her ability to remain calm and effective in chaotic situations. It was during her Iraq deployment that Maria first experienced the reality of combat without her primary weapon. During a patrol that was ambushed, her rifle was damaged by shrapnel, leaving her with only her sidearm and her training. While her squad engaged the enemy, Maria used her knowledge of the terrain and her hand-to-hand combat skills to flank the attackers and neutralize 2 insurgents who had been providing covering fire. The successful completion of this mission earned her a commendation and reinforced her belief that true strength came from adaptability, not just firepower. After returning from Iraq, Maria underwent additional specialized training in mountain warfare, preparing for what would be her most challenging deployment yet. Afghanistan's rugged terrain and complex tactical situation would test every skill she had developed, every lesson she had learned, and every instinct she had honed during her military career. As Maria prepared for deployment to Afghanistan, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small-town Texas girl to a special operations soldier, she had consistently exceeded expectations and overcome obstacles that would have stopped others. She had learned to be strong not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She had developed skills that went far beyond traditional soldiering, and she had proven repeatedly that she could perform when the stakes were highest. What Maria didn't know as she prepared for Afghanistan was that all of her training, all of her experiences, and all of the lessons she had learned were preparing her for a moment that would test everything she was made of. In the mountains of Afghanistan, she would face a situation that would require every skill she possessed, and some she didn't know she had. She would discover that sometimes losing your primary advantage forces you to find strengths you never knew existed. The girl who had climbed trees and fought with her brothers in Texas, who had navigated dangerous neighborhoods and excelled under pressure, was about to face the ultimate test of everything she had become. And in a canyon in Afghanistan, Maria Santos would prove that true warriors are defined not by their weapons, but by their will to survive and their refusal to surrender, no matter how dire the circumstances might seem. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman in a swirl of dust and rotor wash that temporarily blinded everyone on the landing zone. As Maria stepped off the aircraft with her gear, she felt the immediate difference that Afghanistan presented. The air was thinner at this altitude, the landscape more unforgiving than anything she had experienced in Iraq, and the sense of isolation more complete. Afghanistan in 2011 was a complex battlefield where traditional military tactics often proved inadequate against an enemy that knew every rock, every cave, and every hidden path and mountains they had called home for generations. The Taliban and other insurgent groups had adapted their strategies over years of conflict, becoming masters of guerrilla warfare in terrain that naturally favored defenders over attackers. Maria's unit was tasked with intelligence gathering and reconnaissance missions in the Hindu Kush mountain range, an area known for its strategic importance and extreme danger. The mountains provided perfect hiding places for insurgent leaders, weapons caches, and training camps, but reaching these locations required soldiers to traverse some of the most treacherous terrain on Earth. During her first briefing, Maria learned about the unique challenges of mountain warfare in Afghanistan. The enemy held the high ground in most engagements, had intimate knowledge of the terrain, and could disappear into caves and hidden valleys that appeared on no maps. Traditional air support was often limited by weather conditions and the need to avoid civilian casualties in populated areas. Ground troops had to be prepared to operate independently for extended periods, often beyond the range of immediate backup or extraction. The briefing officer, a weathered colonel who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, emphasized the psychological aspects of mountain warfare. In these mountains, he explained, the enemy's greatest weapon isn't their rifles or explosives, it's the feeling of isolation they can create. When you're surrounded by peaks that seem to go on forever, when radio communication is spotty, and when you know the nearest help might be hours or days away, the mind can become your worst enemy. Maria understood immediately what he meant. The mountains were beautiful but intimidating, creating a sense of being completely cut off from the world. For soldiers accustomed to the support systems of modern military operations, this isolation could be psychologically devastating. But Maria had always been comfortable with solitude, and the mountains, despite their dangers, felt familiar to someone who had grown up exploring wild places. Her first few missions were reconnaissance patrols designed to familiarize her with the area and establish relationships with local Afghan forces who served as guides and interpreters. Maria quickly learned that success in Afghanistan required not just military skills, but cultural awareness and the ability to build trust with people whose lives had been shaped by decades of conflict. The Afghan soldiers she worked with were initially skeptical of an American woman warrior. In their culture, women traditionally did not serve in combat roles, and some struggled to accept Maria as an equal. However, Maria's competence and professionalism quickly won their respect. She learned basic phrases in Dari and Pashto, showed genuine interest in Afghan culture, and demonstrated repeatedly that she was willing to take the same risks as any male soldier. One of her Afghan colleagues, a veteran fighter named Ahmad who had been battling various enemies for over 20 years, became particularly important to Maria's understanding of mountain warfare. Ahmad had survived the Soviet occupation, civil wars between rival factions, and years of fighting against Taliban forces. His knowledge of the mountains was encyclopedic, and his ability to read terrain and predict enemy movements was almost supernatural. In these mountains, Ahmad told Maria during one patrol, you must think like water. Water always finds a way through rocks, around obstacles, to reach its destination. Rigid thinking gets you trapped. Flexible thinking keeps you alive. This wisdom would prove crucial during the events that would define Maria's tour of duty. As weeks turned into months, Maria participated in increasingly complex operations. Her unit conducted raids on suspected weapons caches, gathered intelligence on insurgent movements, and worked to disrupt supply lines that enemy forces used to move equipment and personnel through the mountain passes. Each mission taught her more about the unique nature of warfare in this environment. The physical demands of mountain operations were unlike anything Maria had experienced. Carrying full combat gear while climbing steep trails at high altitude pushed even the fittest soldiers to their limits. The weather could change from clear skies to blizzard conditions in minutes, and temperatures might drop 40 degrees between day and night. Dehydration and altitude sickness were constant threats, and a simple ankle injury could become life-threatening if it occurred in a remote location. But perhaps the greatest challenge was the psychological pressure of knowing that enemies might be watching from any of hundreds of possible hiding places. The mountains provided countless opportunities for ambush, and insurgent forces had become expert at choosing exactly when and where to strike for maximum effect. Every patrol was a calculated risk, every movement potentially exposed to enemy observation. During one particularly challenging mission, Maria's unit was tasked with investigating reports of a high-value target meeting that was supposedly taking place in a remote valley deep in the mountains. The intelligence was time-sensitive, requiring them to move quickly through terrain that offered little cover and multiple opportunities for ambush. The patrol began before dawn, with Maria and 7 other soldiers making their way along narrow mountain paths that wound between towering peaks. Their Afghan guide, a local man who claimed to know secret routes through the area, led them along trails that seemed to disappear and reappear without logic or reason. As they climbed higher into the mountains, radio communication with their base became increasingly unreliable. The peaks interfered with signals, creating dead zones where they were completely cut off from outside contact. This isolation was both tactical necessity and strategic vulnerability. While it made them harder for enemies to track electronically, it also meant they were entirely dependent on their own resources if things went wrong. The landscape around them was breathtakingly beautiful, but utterly unforgiving. Jagged peaks rose thousands of feet above them, while narrow valleys dropped away into seemingly bottomless chasms. The rocks were loose and treacherous, making every step a careful calculation. One wrong move could send a soldier tumbling down a mountainside, potentially taking others with them. Maria found herself fascinated by the tactical complexities of this environment. Unlike urban or desert warfare, where lines of sight and fields of fire were relatively predictable, the mountains created a three-dimensional battlefield where enemies could appear from above, below, or seemingly from within the rocks themselves. Traditional military formations and movement techniques had to be adapted constantly to account for terrain that changed with every turn of the trail. As they moved deeper into the mountains, their guide became increasingly nervous. He claimed to recognize signs that insurgent forces had been in the area recently: disturbed rocks, unusual markings, and subtle changes in the natural environment that only someone with intimate knowledge of the mountains would notice. Ahmad confirmed these observations, pointing out indicators that Maria was learning to recognize herself. The mission profile had indicated they were entering an area with moderate threat levels, but the evidence they were seeing suggested otherwise. Fresh tracks, recently constructed fighting positions, and communication equipment that had been hastily abandoned all pointed to significant enemy activity in the region. Maria's tactical instincts, honed through years of training and combat experience, told her they were walking into a situation far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. As the patrol continued, Maria noticed changes in the behavior of her team members. The isolation and constant threat of ambush were beginning to affect morale and decision-making. Some soldiers became overly cautious, slowing their movement and constantly checking for threats that might not exist. Others became reckless, eager to complete the mission quickly and return to the relative safety of base camp. Maria understood that maintaining psychological balance was crucial in this environment. She had learned during her training that fear and stress could quickly spiral out of control in isolated situations, leading to poor decisions that could get people killed. She made a conscious effort to stay calm and focused, using techniques she had developed to manage stress and maintain situational awareness even under extreme pressure. The patrol's objective was a remote valley where intelligence sources had reported unusual activity. As they approached their destination, the terrain became even more challenging. The trail narrowed to barely shoulder width in some places, with steep drops on one side and vertical rock faces on the other. Moving in single file, each soldier was completely dependent on those in front and behind for security and safety. It was in this treacherous terrain that Maria began to notice something that would prove crucial in the events to come. The rock formations in this area created natural acoustic effects, amplifying and distorting sounds in unexpected ways. Conversations that seemed private could be heard clearly from great distances, while obvious sounds could disappear completely into the rocks. Understanding these acoustic properties would become vital for both communication and survival. As afternoon approached, the patrol reached a high ridge overlooking their target valley. Through binoculars, they could see signs of recent human activity, vehicle tracks, temporary structures, and movement patterns that suggested the intelligence reports had been accurate. However, they also observed indicators that the site might be more heavily defended than expected. The team leader made the decision to establish an observation post on the ridge and conduct surveillance before moving into the valley. This was standard procedure, but it also meant spending several hours in an exposed position where they could potentially be observed by enemy forces. Maria volunteered for the first watch, using her exceptional observational skills to study the valley below and identify potential threats and opportunities. During her surveillance shift, Maria observed something that concerned her deeply. The valley showed signs of being used as a staging area for larger operations than had been reported in their briefings. Equipment and personnel movement suggested this was not simply a meeting location, but possibly a logistics hub for insurgent operations throughout the region. If her observations were correct, their small patrol had stumbled upon something much more significant than anyone had realized. As evening approached, and they prepared to move into the valley for closer reconnaissance, Maria felt the familiar heightening of her senses that always preceded dangerous operations. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow potentially threatening, every decision potentially crucial for survival. She checked her equipment methodically, ensuring her rifle was clean and functional, her communications gear operational, and her backup plans clearly defined. What Maria didn't know as night fell over the Afghan mountains was that enemy forces had been tracking their movement for hours. The patrol's approach had been observed, their route predicted, and their destination anticipated. While Maria and her team prepared to gather intelligence on insurgent activities, those same insurgents were preparing to gather intelligence of their own by capturing or eliminating the American patrol that had ventured so far from safety into their territory. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test every skill Maria had learned, every instinct she had developed, and every ounce of courage she possessed. In the unforgiving landscape of the Afghan mountains, where help was hours away and mistakes were often fatal, Maria was about to face the challenge that would define her as both a soldier and a survivor. The descent into the valley began at dusk, when the fading light would provide concealment while still allowing enough visibility for navigation. Maria's patrol moved in tactical formation, with Ahmad leading the way and each soldier maintaining visual contact with the person ahead while watching for threats from their assigned sector. The narrow trail switchbacked down the mountainside, offering brief glimpses of their destination through breaks in the rocky terrain. As they descended, the acoustic properties Maria had noticed earlier became more pronounced. Loose rocks dislodged by their movement echoed off canyon walls, creating sounds that seemed to come from multiple directions. Radio communication became increasingly difficult as the rock formations interfered with their signals, leaving them more isolated with each step they took away from the high ground. The valley floor, when they finally reached it, was eerily quiet. Their intelligence had indicated recent activity, but now the area seemed abandoned. Temporary structures that had been visible from the ridge were gone, and vehicle tracks had been carefully obscured. Only someone with Ahmad's experience would have noticed the subtle signs that people had been here very recently, and that they had left in a hurry. Maria's tactical instincts were screaming warnings. The valley felt wrong, too quiet, too convenient. Every aspect of their approach had gone exactly according to plan, which in her experience usually meant someone else was making the plans. She tried to communicate her concerns to the team leader through hand signals, but, in the dim light, and with everyone focused on immediate threats, her warnings went unnoticed. The patrol spread out to conduct their reconnaissance, with each soldier assigned to search specific areas for intelligence. Maria was tasked with investigating a cluster of rocks near the center of the valley where aerial surveillance had indicated possible equipment storage. As she approached the location, her uneasiness intensified. The rocks were arranged too perfectly, creating hiding places that could conceal multiple people. It was then that she noticed something that confirmed her worst fears. Fresh scratches on the rocks showed where metal equipment had been moved recently, and disturbed earth indicated heavy objects had been dragged away in haste. But, more importantly, she could smell something that didn't belong in this environment. Cigarette smoke, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere among the rocks ahead of her. Maria immediately signaled to halt her advance and tried to alert the rest of her team, but they were spread across the valley floor and focused on their individual assignments. Her radio crackled with static, making clear communication impossible. She was faced with a critical decision: abandon her position and try to warn the others, potentially exposing herself to enemy fire, or continue forward and try to gather more information about the threat she sensed. Training and instinct told her to trust her observations. Someone was hiding in those rocks, and if they had wanted to kill her immediately, they would have done so already. This suggested they were waiting for something, possibly for the entire patrol to move into a predetermined kill zone. Maria decided to continue forward cautiously, hoping to identify the threat and find a way to warn her team without triggering an ambush. As she moved closer to the rocks, Maria employed every stealth technique she had learned. She controlled her breathing, placed each footstep carefully to minimize noise, and used available cover to mask her approach. Her rifle was ready, safety off, finger near, but not on the trigger. Every sense was hyper-alert, searching for any indication of enemy presence or hostile intent. The first sign of immediate danger came not from sight or sound, but from a change in the way her own voice echoed when she whispered into her radio microphone. The acoustic properties she had noticed earlier told her that someone else was very close, close enough to affect the sound patterns around her position. Someone was hiding in the rocks directly ahead, and they were trying to remain perfectly still. Maria's next decision would have long-lasting consequences for everything that followed. Standard operating procedure dictated that she should immediately withdraw and call for backup. But her tactical assessment suggested that withdrawing now might trigger the ambush she suspected was being prepared for her entire team. Instead, she made a calculated decision to continue forward and try to neutralize the immediate threat before it could endanger the other soldiers. Moving with extreme caution, Maria approached the largest rock formation where the sound patterns indicated someone was hiding. She could now detect human presence through multiple senses: a slight change in air movement, suggesting controlled breathing, the faint but distinct smell of unwashed clothing and weapon oil, and an almost imperceptible sound that might have been fabric brushing against stone. As she rounded the edge of the largest boulder, Maria found herself face to face with an insurgent fighter who was clearly as surprised to see her as she was to see him. For a split second, both froze, each calculating their options and the likely consequences of their next action. The insurgent was older than Maria had expected, with graying hair and weather-beaten features that spoke of decades spent fighting in these mountains. The moment of mutual surprise lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in those seconds both fighters made critical assessments that would determine whether they lived or died. The insurgent was armed with an AK-47 rifle, but it was positioned across his lap, not ready for immediate use. Maria's rifle was ready, but firing it would immediately alert anyone else in the area to her presence and potentially trigger the larger ambush she suspected was waiting. Instead of reaching for his rifle, the insurgent made a choice that surprised Maria. He raised his hand slightly and spoke in accented English. "American soldier, you are in great danger here. This valley is trapped for your people. You must leave now, quickly, before others come." Maria kept her rifle trained on him, but didn't immediately fire. Something in his voice and demeanor suggested he was telling the truth, but she couldn't afford to trust anyone in this situation. "How many others?" she asked quietly, barely above a whisper. "Many," he replied. "They come soon to capture your patrol alive. Important prisoners for them. But if you resist, they kill everyone." He gestured toward the rocks around them. "Positions everywhere. Your team's surrounded already, but they don't know yet." This information confirmed Maria's tactical assessment, but it also presented her with an impossible choice. If this man was telling the truth, her patrol was walking into a carefully prepared trap designed to capture them alive for intelligence purposes. If he was lying, she was wasting precious time that could be used to warn her team and organize a defense. "Why are you telling me this?" Maria asked, maintaining her aim while trying to process this unexpected development. The man's answer surprised her even more. My son was killed by Taliban last year because he worked with Americans. Not all Afghan people are your enemy. Some of us remember who helps our families. He paused, then added urgently, but I cannot help you more. If they find me talking to you, they kill my remaining family. Before Maria could respond, the sound of movement from multiple directions told her the situation was escalating rapidly. The insurgent heard it too and immediately lowered himself behind the rocks, becoming effectively invisible. Maria was alone again, but now she knew with certainty that her patrol was surrounded and that the ambush was about to be triggered. Her radio crackled with static, then briefly cleared enough for her to hear her team leader's voice. Santos, report your status. We're seeing movement on multiple sides and need to consolidate positions. Maria keyed her microphone and tried to respond, but interference made communication impossible. She could hear fragments of transmissions from other team members, indicating they were also becoming aware of the threat, but coordinated communication was impossible in the electromagnetic chaos created by the mountainous terrain and possibly enemy jamming equipment. From her position among the rocks, Maria could see several members of her patrol moving across the valley floor, still focused on their reconnaissance mission and apparently unaware of the extent of the threat surrounding them. She could also see movement among the rocks and shadows that indicated multiple enemy positions. Her tactical training told her the situation was already beyond the point where standard procedures would be effective. The first shots came from the high ground surrounding the valley, not aimed to kill but clearly intended to drive the patrol toward the center of the valley where they could be more easily captured or controlled. Maria watched as her team members reacted according to their training, seeking cover and trying to establish defensive positions, not realizing they were being herded into an even more dangerous situation. As the firefight began in earnest, Maria faced a decision that would define everything that followed. She could try to reach her team and join the conventional defense they were attempting to organize, knowing that they were outnumbered and surrounded. Or she could use her position and the information she had gathered to try something unconventional that might give them a chance to escape. The choice was made for her when she saw 3 insurgent fighters moving to cut off her team's most likely escape route. These fighters were carrying equipment that looked like restraint devices rather than additional weapons, confirming that the goal was capture rather than elimination. If they succeeded in blocking that escape route, her entire team would be trapped in a kill zone with no way out. Maria made a decision that violated standard military doctrine, but aligned perfectly with the adaptability training that had defined her military career. Instead of trying to rejoin her unit, she would use her isolated position to attack the ambush from an unexpected direction. She would become the aggressor in a situation where she was supposed to be the victim. Moving quickly but carefully through the rocks, Maria began working her way toward the 3 insurgents who were positioning themselves to block her team's escape. The sounds of the firefight would mask any noise she made, and the enemy fighters would be focused on the main engagement rather than watching for threats from their rear. As she moved, Maria could hear the intensity of the firefight increasing. The initial warning shots had given way to more serious engagement, and she could tell from the sound patterns that her team was being pressed hard from multiple directions. Time was running out, and if she was going to make a difference in this situation, she needed to act quickly and decisively. The 3 insurgents were positioned behind a natural rock barrier that gave them excellent cover while allowing them to control the key terrain feature that represented her team's best chance for escape. They were well-armed and appeared to be experienced fighters, but they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed the threat would come from the direction of the main engagement. Maria approached them from their blind spot, using the same stealth techniques that had allowed her to get close to the first insurgent she had encountered. But this time, there would be no conversation and no hesitation. These men were actively trying to trap and potentially kill her fellow soldiers, and she would not allow that to happen. The attack Maria was about to launch would require every skill she had learned during her military career. She would need to be fast, accurate, and completely committed to her course of action. There would be no opportunity for second chances, no backup plan if things went wrong. In the next few minutes, Maria would discover whether all of her training and all of her preparation had been sufficient for the ultimate test she was about to face. What Maria didn't know as she prepared to engage 3 armed fighters with only the element of surprise in her favor was that this was only the beginning of her ordeal. The ambush she was trying to disrupt was more complex and better planned than she realized, and her actions were about to trigger a sequence of events that would test her abilities far beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. Maria's attack on the three insurgents blocking her team's escape route was swift and decisive. Using her rifle with the precision that had made her exceptional during training, she eliminated the first threat before the other two even realized they were under attack from behind. But as she engaged the second fighter, something went catastrophically wrong. The sound of her rifle jamming was barely audible over the ongoing firefight, but to Maria, it was as loud as a thunderclap. A spent cartridge case had failed to eject properly, causing a stoppage that would take precious seconds to clear under ideal conditions. In combat, with two armed enemies still alive and now aware of her position, those seconds might as well have been hours. Maria's training kicked in automatically as she attempted to clear the malfunction, but the mechanism was completely jammed. The rifle that had been her primary weapon, her security blanket, and her means of projecting force at distance was now nothing more than an awkwardly shaped club. In that instant, everything she had been taught about military tactics and survival became irrelevant. The second insurgent, surprised but not panicked, was bringing his weapon around toward Maria's position. She had perhaps 2 seconds before he would be able to fire, and in those 2 seconds she had to make a choice that would determine whether she lived or died. Every instinct told her to take cover and try to fix her rifle, but her tactical mind calculated that she would never have enough time. Instead, Maria did something that surprised even her. She threw her jammed rifle directly at the second insurgent's face with all the force she could generate. The unexpected projectile struck him in the head, not hard enough to knock him unconscious, but sufficient to disrupt his aim and buy her a few precious seconds to close the distance between them. As the insurgent staggered backward, trying to recover his balance and bring his weapon to bear, Maria launched herself forward in a tackle that her brothers would have recognized from their childhood football games in the backyard. But this was not a game, and the consequences of failure would not be a scraped knee and wounded pride. The impact drove both fighters to the ground among the sharp rocks that littered the valley floor. Maria landed on top, giving her a momentary advantage, but the insurgent was larger and stronger than she was. As they grappled for control of his rifle, Maria realized that her superior physical conditioning and training in hand-to-hand combat were being offset by his size advantage and desperate determination. The fight that followed was brutal and exhausting. Each combatant was fighting for their life, knowing that losing meant death. They rolled among the rocks, each trying to gain a decisive advantage while avoiding the weapon that could end the struggle in an instant. Maria's tactical training had included extensive hand-to-hand combat instruction, but fighting for her life against a determined opponent on treacherous terrain was unlike anything she had experienced in training. During the struggle, Maria managed to get her hands on the insurgent's rifle, but he maintained his grip as well. For several crucial seconds, they fought for control of the weapon while the third insurgent, who had taken cover when the shooting started, tried to get a clear shot at Maria without hitting his companion. The situation was chaotic and desperate, with victory likely to go to whoever made the first critical mistake. Maria's advantage came from an unexpected source. The rocks they were fighting among were loose and unstable, and her smaller size allowed her to maintain better balance as they moved across the uneven surface. When the insurgent made a sudden move to wrench the rifle away from her, he shifted his weight at exactly the wrong moment and lost his footing on the treacherous rocks. The brief moment when he was off balance was all Maria needed. Using a combat technique she had practiced hundreds of times but never used in actual combat, she redirected his momentum and used his own strength against him. The insurgent went down hard, his head striking a rock with a sound that told Maria he would not be getting back up. But even as she gained control of the second insurgent's rifle, the third fighter was moving to a position where he could engage her effectively. Maria found herself in possession of an unfamiliar weapon, in an exposed position, facing an enemy who knew the terrain better than she did and who had the advantage of established cover. The rifle she had captured was an older model AK-47, worn but functional. However, Maria had trained primarily with American weapons, and the differences in controls and operation could be fatal in a high-stress situation. She took a few seconds to familiarize herself with the weapon's operation, time she could ill afford, but that might prevent a malfunction at a crucial moment. As she prepared to engage the third insurgent, Maria heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. The main firefight involving her team had changed character, becoming more sporadic and one-sided. Either her fellow soldiers had gained the upper hand, which seemed unlikely given their tactical disadvantage, or they had been overwhelmed. The radio traffic she could hear suggested the latter. The third insurgent used Maria's momentary distraction to move to a better position. When she looked for him again, he had disappeared among the rocks, leaving her uncertain of his exact location, but certain that he was maneuvering to attack her from an unexpected angle. She was now alone, cut off from her team, armed with an unfamiliar weapon, and facing an enemy who knew the terrain intimately. Maria's situation became even more desperate when she realized that other insurgent fighters were moving in her direction, drawn by the sounds of the struggle. The voices she could hear speaking in Dari indicated that multiple enemies were coordinating to surround her position. Her attack on the blocking force had been successful in the short term, but it had also revealed her location to other hostile forces in the area. The tactical situation was becoming impossible. Maria was outnumbered, outgunned, and operating in terrain that favored her enemies. Standard military doctrine would suggest that her best option was to evade contact and try to escape to a position where she could call for help. But escaping would mean abandoning her team, something she was not prepared to do regardless of the personal cost. Instead, Maria made a decision that would have seemed insane to any outside observer, but made perfect sense given her training and personality. She decided to continue attacking, to use aggression and unpredictability to offset the tactical disadvantages she faced. If the enemy expected her to run, she would fight. If they expected her to hide, she would attack. Moving through the rocks with skills learned during years of training in difficult terrain, Maria began hunting the insurgents who were hunting her. She used every technique she had learned about stealth, misdirection, and psychological warfare. Her goal was not just to survive, but to create enough chaos and confusion that her team might have a chance to escape the larger ambush. The cat and mouse game that followed tested every skill Maria possessed. She had to remain invisible to enemies who knew the terrain better than she did, while simultaneously positioning herself to attack targets of opportunity. Every movement had to be calculated, every sound considered, every shadow evaluated for its potential to provide concealment or reveal her position. During this deadly game of hide and seek, Maria discovered something about herself that she hadn't fully realized before. The isolation and pressure that might have broken other soldiers seemed to sharpen her focus and enhance her abilities. Instead of becoming panicked or desperate, she became calmer and more analytical, processing information faster and making better decisions as the situation became more dangerous. The first insurgent she encountered during her solo campaign was moving carelessly, apparently confident that a lone American soldier would be trying to escape rather than attack. Maria used this overconfidence against him, positioning herself along his likely route and eliminating him quietly when he passed within range. The capture of his equipment gave her additional ammunition and a functioning radio that allowed her to monitor enemy communications. Listening to the insurgent radio traffic, Maria learned information that changed her understanding of the entire situation. This was not a random ambush or opportunistic attack. Her patrol had been specifically targeted, their route predicted, and their destination known in advance. The operation had been planned to capture American soldiers alive for intelligence purposes, with killing being a secondary option if capture proved impossible. More importantly, Maria learned that her team was still alive but had been forced into a defensive position with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. The insurgents were preparing for a final assault that would either result in surrender or elimination of the trapped soldiers. Maria realized that she was not just fighting for her own survival. She was her team's only hope for rescue. The radio intelligence also revealed the locations of several insurgent positions and their planned movements for the final assault. This information gave Maria a tactical picture that no one else on either side possessed. She knew where the enemies were, where they were going, and what they intended to do. The question was whether she could use this knowledge effectively while operating alone against superior numbers. Maria's decision to continue fighting rather than escaping had put her in an impossible position, but it had also created an opportunity that wouldn't exist if she had followed conventional tactics. As the only American fighter who was mobile and undetected, she could potentially disrupt the planned assault in ways that might allow her team to break free from their trapped position. The weapons and equipment she had captured from the insurgents she had eliminated gave her additional capabilities, but they also presented new challenges. The captured radio allowed her to monitor enemy communications, but using it for transmission would immediately reveal her position to direction-finding equipment. The extra ammunition was in a caliber different from her original rifle, limiting its usefulness. Every advantage came with corresponding risks and limitations. As Maria prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous phase of her solo operation, she reflected on the series of events that had brought her to this point. A routine reconnaissance mission had become a desperate fight for survival. A mechanical malfunction had forced her to abandon conventional tactics and rely on skills and instincts she had hoped never to need in actual combat. But, perhaps most importantly, Maria realized that everything she had experienced during her military career had been preparing her for this moment. The childhood spent fighting with her brothers, the challenges of growing up in a dangerous neighborhood, the intensive military training, the combat experience in Iraq, and the specialized mountain warfare preparation had all contributed to her ability to function effectively in this impossible situation. What Maria didn't know as she prepared for her most challenging fight was that the insurgents were about to make a critical error in judgment. They had planned their operation based on conventional assumptions about how American soldiers would respond to ambush and overwhelming odds. They had not anticipated having to deal with a warrior who refused to follow conventional rules, who became more dangerous when separated from support, and who was willing to risk everything to save her fellow soldiers. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of human endurance, tactical skill, and sheer determination. In a remote valley in the mountains of Afghanistan, Maria Santos was about to prove that true strength comes not from weapons or numbers, but from the refusal to surrender when everything seems hopeless. The final confrontation began when Maria intercepted radio communications indicating that 5 insurgent fighters were moving to execute the planned final assault on her trapped team. These were not the local fighters she had been engaging, but experienced Taliban operatives who had been brought in specifically for this operation. Their leader was someone the Americans had been hunting for months, a tactical expert responsible for numerous successful attacks on coalition forces. From her concealed position among the rocks, Maria could see her team's defensive position about 200 meters away. Her fellow soldiers had been forced into a natural depression that provided some protection from small arms fire but had become a trap with no viable escape routes. She could see the insurgent assault team moving to attack positions that would allow them to either force surrender through overwhelming firepower or eliminate the Americans entirely. Maria faced a choice that would define not just the next few minutes, but the rest of her life. She could attempt to escape while the final assault distracted the insurgents, potentially saving herself but abandoning her teammates to death or capture. Or she could intervene in a situation where she was outnumbered 5-1, armed with captured weapons she wasn't completely familiar with, and operating in terrain that favored her enemies. The decision was never really in doubt. Maria had joined the military to serve something greater than herself, and she had trained for years to be ready for moments exactly like this. Her teammates were counting on her, even though they didn't know she was in position to help them. Failure to act would mean living with the knowledge that she had chosen personal safety over the lives of soldiers who would have died protecting her. Maria's tactical assessment of the situation revealed both opportunities and obstacles. The 5 insurgents were moving in a formation that kept them mutually supporting but also predictable. Their route took them through terrain that offered limited cover in some areas, creating windows of vulnerability that could be exploited by someone attacking from an unexpected direction. However, engaging 5 trained fighters simultaneously was beyond the capabilities of any individual soldier using conventional tactics. Maria would need to use every advantage she could create while minimizing her exposure to return fire. Most importantly, she would need to complete her attack quickly before the insurgents could coordinate an effective response. The captured radio equipment allowed Maria to monitor the insurgents' coordination, giving her real-time intelligence about their movements and intentions. She learned that they planned to approach her team's position from 3 directions simultaneously, with 2 fighters providing overwatch, while 3 others moved in for the final assault. This information was crucial for planning her own attack. Maria positioned herself to intercept the assault team at a point where the terrain would force them to move through a narrow passage between large rock formations. This was the only location where she could engage multiple targets while having escape routes available if her attack failed. The position also allowed her to use the acoustic properties of the canyon to her advantage, potentially creating confusion about the number and location of attackers. As the insurgents approached her ambush position, Maria made final preparations that would determine the success or failure of her desperate plan. She arranged her captured weapons and ammunition for maximum effectiveness, identified specific cover positions she could move between during the engagement, and planned the sequence of her attacks to create maximum psychological impact while minimizing her exposure to return fire. The first insurgent entered Maria's kill zone at exactly the moment she had predicted based on their radio communications. Her first shot was carefully aimed and instantly fatal, eliminating the team leader before he could react or warn the others. But the sound of the shot immediately alerted the remaining 4 fighters to the presence of a threat they hadn't expected. What followed was the most intense 83 seconds of combat in Maria's military career. The 4 remaining insurgents reacted with the training and experience that had made them effective fighters, but they were responding to a situation they had not anticipated. Their formation, perfect for the assault they had planned, was wrong for defending against an attack from their rear. Maria's second shot eliminated the insurgent who was carrying the radio equipment, cutting off their ability to coordinate with other enemy forces in the area. This tactical decision was crucial because it prevented them from calling for reinforcements while also eliminating their means of communicating the failure of their mission to higher-level commanders. The third insurgent managed to identify Maria's approximate position and returned fire, forcing her to move to her second prepared position. As bullets struck the rocks where she had been concealed moments before, Maria realized that these were not typical insurgent fighters, but highly trained specialists who could adapt quickly to changing tactical situations. From her second position, Maria engaged the third fighter while simultaneously repositioning to avoid return fire from the fourth insurgent, who was attempting to flank her position. The combination of movement, accurate shooting, and tactical thinking required during these few seconds pushed her physical and mental abilities to their absolute limits. The fourth insurgent was eliminated as he attempted to reach a position where he could attack Maria from the side. His death left only one enemy fighter remaining, but this individual proved to be the most dangerous of all. Instead of panicking or attempting to escape, he used the terrain expertly to close the distance between himself and Maria, turning the engagement into the kind of close-quarters battle where superior numbers would matter less. The final confrontation took place among the rocks at distances measured in meters rather than tens of meters. Both fighters were using every technique they had learned about combat in confined spaces, each trying to gain the split-second advantage that would determine who survived. Maria's smaller size and superior physical conditioning became crucial advantages as they maneuvered through spaces that challenged larger fighters. The decisive moment came when Maria used a technique she had learned during her specialized training but had never employed in actual combat. Instead of continuing to trade shots with an opponent who was as skilled as she was, she created a distraction that drew him into a position where she could engage him hand-to-hand, neutralizing his weapon advantages through aggressive close combat. The hand-to-hand fight was brief but intense, ending when Maria successfully applied a combat technique that left her opponent unconscious and no longer a threat. As silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the sound of her own labored breathing, Maria realized that she had survived an engagement that should have been impossible for any individual fighter. The radio traffic that followed confirmed what Maria had hoped but hardly dared to believe. The elimination of the assault team had broken the larger ambush operation, causing the remaining insurgent forces to withdraw rather than risk further casualties against an enemy they could no longer predict or control. Her teammates were calling for extraction, their voices indicating relief and confusion about how their seemingly hopeless situation had suddenly changed. Maria's extraction of her team from their trapped position required additional tactical movement through terrain that might still contain enemy fighters. However, the psychological impact of her successful attack had shifted the balance of the engagement. The insurgents had lost their tactical initiative and were no longer operating from positions of strength. As Maria reunited with her team and began the process of moving to an extraction point, she reflected on the events of the past several hours. A routine mission had become a life-or-death struggle that tested every skill she possessed. The loss of her primary weapon had forced her to rely on abilities and training she had hoped never to need in actual combat. But, more importantly, Maria realized that the events in the Afghan Canyon had taught her something fundamental about herself and about the nature of true strength. Weapons, equipment, and numerical superiority were important in combat, but they were not decisive. What mattered most was the willingness to continue fighting when everything seemed hopeless, the ability to adapt when plans failed, and the refusal to abandon others regardless of personal risk. The after-action reports and debriefings that followed Maria's return to base would attempt to analyze and explain what had happened in the canyon. Military analysts would study the engagement for lessons about mountain warfare, small unit tactics, and individual combat effectiveness. But the statistics and technical analysis would miss the most important aspect of what had occurred. In 83 seconds of the most intense combat imaginable, Maria Santos had proven something that could not be measured or quantified. She had demonstrated that true warriors are not defined by their weapons or their circumstances, but by their character and their determination to succeed regardless of the odds they face. The insurgents who had planned and executed the ambush had made careful calculations about American military capabilities and likely responses. They had planned for conventional tactics, standard equipment, and predictable behavior patterns. What they had not planned for was encountering someone who refused to follow conventional rules when those rules led to defeat. Years later, when Maria reflected on her experiences in Afghanistan, she would understand that the events in that remote canyon had changed her in ways that went beyond military recognition or career advancement. She had discovered something about herself that she could not have learned in any training environment or through any other experience. The girl who had grown up fighting with her brothers in Texas, who had navigated dangerous neighborhoods through intelligence and determination, who had excelled in military training through dedication and hard work, had become something more. She had become a warrior in the truest sense of the word, someone who could face impossible odds and find a way to prevail through sheer force of will and refusal to surrender. The 83 seconds that defined Maria's military career had also proved something important about the nature of human potential. When everything goes wrong, when all advantages are lost, and when defeat seems certain, there remains one factor that cannot be calculated or predicted. Some people, when pushed beyond their apparent limits, discover that they have capabilities they never knew existed. Maria Santos had entered the Afghan mountains as a highly trained soldier with impressive skills and excellent preparation. She emerged from that canyon as something different, a proven warrior who had faced the ultimate test and prevailed through intelligence, courage, and absolute determination to protect those who depended on her. The weapons they had taken from her had been replaced by something far more powerful, the knowledge that true strength comes from within, and that no external circumstances can defeat someone who refuses to be defeated. In the mountains of Afghanistan, Maria had learned the most important lesson any warrior can learn, that the most powerful weapon is the human spirit, and that spirit, once fully awakened, is unstoppable. The story of those 83 seconds would become part of military legend, but, for Maria, it was something more personal. It was proof that she had become everything she had hoped to become when she first decided to serve her country. She had faced the ultimate test of a warrior and had not just survived, but triumphed in a way that would inspire others for years to come.